His hand slammed the desk so hard my coffee rippled, like it was bracing for impact. The report he shoved at me wasn't mine. The bug wasn't mine. And the failure, again, wasn't mine. But at 6:55 p.m., I was the one being held responsible. One blink ago, I was leading the most ambitious AI deployment in the company's history. The next, I was being dismissed over someone else's mistake. No conversation, no context. Just a command and a clock running out. I'm Brielle Vexley, lead systems architect of Mirage 9, Tarkin Digital's $950 million neural routing engine, scheduled for release at 9 a.m. the next day. I built the core logic from scratch. 6 years, 4 rebuilds, a patent application, and a dozen 2 a.m. emergency recoveries. When the system froze in beta 2 winters ago, I slept in the server room. When the board wanted a faster launch, I rewrote the neural pathways by hand. I wasn't just another engineer. I was the backbone of this thing. And yet, Brennan Arlo acted like I was disposable. He came in 4 months ago with a crisp suit, a smug grin, and a mission to modernize the culture. Step 1: strip away what already worked and replace it with whatever looked flashier on a pitch deck. He didn't understand the code, the architecture, or the people, but he knew how to make noise in meetings and look important in emails. He called me legacy logic once, in front of the entire team. Still, I stayed. Not for him, for the engineers I mentored, for the system I poured my life into, and for the silent promise I'd made to myself that I'd finish what I started. I swallowed the disrespect. Until tonight. The error he pushed across the desk wasn't mine, but he demanded I fix it before sunrise. When I calmly explained it fell under a different team's module, he didn't blink. Fix it tonight, or you're done here. I felt my heart knock once. Hard, then go cold. I stood, straightened my blazer, picked up my bag. Then I'm done here. And I left. No rage, no outburst. Just a faint smile, one he didn't understand. Because if Brennan Arlo truly knew what Mirage 9 required to launch, he would have never fired me at 6:55 p.m. As the elevator doors closed behind me, the silence pressed in. No one chased after me. No one called my name. The last sound from that boardroom was the faint rustle of Brennan's synthetic charisma deflating behind him. I stood still. The chrome walls reflected a tired face with graying roots, sleepless eyes, and lips drawn tight to keep everything else from falling apart. They think I walked out because of pride. I thought, they don't know what I've already given up. The elevator dinged, and I stepped out, back into my own timeline, the one they never bothered to ask about. It had been 6 years since the Mirage 9 incident. That day, I wasn't in the office. I was in the back of an ambulance, cradling my phone, trying to focus on the flashing heart rate monitor beside my sister's body. We'd just left her house. Stage 4 metastatic cancer. Her breath was shallow. Her lips were blue. The paramedics weren't sure she'd make it to the ER. Then my phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaking. Noira, the SIM control just dropped across 3 flight centers. Mirage 9 is offline. The GPS error's replicating across all training modules. We've got FAA observers on site. We're hours from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit if this isn't contained. I remember looking down at my sister, unconscious, and then at my laptop bag beneath my feet. I didn't say a word. I just opened it. There, in the ambulance, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the acrid smell of sterilized fear. I rewrote the core logic of the emergency redirect protocol. I didn't test it. I didn't comment it. I just trusted my own math. Then I pushed it live over mobile data. 2 bars. The system stabilized in 4 minutes. The FAA never found out. The lawsuits disappeared. And by the time I stepped out of the ambulance, my sister was gone. Mirage 9 became one of Arcana's most celebrated recoveries. It was a turning point in investor trust. The press release quoted Brennan's predecessor, A brilliant team effort. The system responded as designed. Except it hadn't. The system responded because I broke protocol to save it. That single line of code, the one that saved them $48 million, was written on the back of a clipboard in an ambulance. The original file still lives in the archive. Line 1129. Written in the back of an ambulance. No tests. Just hope. No one ever asked me what I missed that day. No one mentioned the funeral I didn't attend. I didn't tell them. I didn't want sympathy. But somewhere inside me, something shifted. I stopped raising my hand first in meetings. I stopped volunteering for the Sunday deployments. I stopped smiling when they gave someone else credit for my work. Back in the present. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and stared out at the mostly empty parking lot. The night air pressed in, still warm from the late autumn sun. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I opened my laptop again and pulled up a version history folder no one else had touched in 5 years. There it was. Mirage Isatianayas. Fallback v3.1unf. I clicked into the old log file and scrolled down slowly until I found it. That line, that moment, that memory. They think I broke things, I whispered, but they never saw how many times I held it all together. I closed the laptop. Gently this time. Behind me, Arcanatech was preparing to go live with a system they didn't even know was incomplete, and now they had fired the one person who had been holding its heart in her hands, long before they even knew it had one. I didn't leave that building angry. I left alert. There's a difference. Some part of me had already been bracing for it, for weeks, if I'm honest. You don't survive this long in tech without developing a kind of sixth sense for people like Brennan Arlo. They don't start by screaming. They don't start by taking your title. They start by smiling. He arrived at Tarkin Digital like a well-cut suit no one ordered. 34, camera ready. Always in a blazer too slim for someone making heavyweight decisions. His first company-wide email didn't mention the engineers. It quoted Steve Jobs. His second introduced the phrase strategic refresh of legacy mindsets. That was the first red flag. I was the legacy. Brennan wasn't dumb. He just didn't care about the system. Not the code, not the culture, not the people who had given 6 years, 10 years, 17 years to it. He cared about headlines, velocity charts, investment buzz. And he had no use for people like me, quiet builders who got things done without a slideshow. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone deserves one. But then came the decisions. He eliminated the overtime meal stipends, canceled Friday wrap-up meetings I'd led for years, rescheduled roadmap briefings to 8:00 p.m., then scolded people for joining late. He didn't say, stay late. He made it the new normal. Still, I held my ground. I did my job. I led the Mirage 9 core with the same precision and quiet care I always had. Until he called it a beautiful relic. He said it in a meeting full of interns. I remember the way their heads tilted, uncertain if they should laugh. What hurt wasn't the words. It was the intent behind them. He was setting the stage, shrinking my role, publicly, making it easier to shove me out later without backlash. I'd seen it happen to others. Now it was my turn. What he didn't know was how much I already knew about him. A few weeks after his arrival, I came across a sanitized exit article from his previous company, but the cached version told a fuller story. Brennan had once been CTO of a fast-scaling logistics startup. He pushed his team through 16-hour days for 19 straight days to meet an impossible demo deadline. One junior engineer collapsed, hit his head falling down the back stairwell after a 3:00 a.m. shift. The company called it an isolated incident. Brennan called it a learning opportunity. Weeks later, he was out, with full equity and a glowing press release about refocusing on visionary leadership. The part that caught in my throat was the photo. It was the same smirk, the same hollow eyes that somehow always passed through you when he talked. Back at Tarkin, the walls were shifting. Engineers who used to stop by my desk now typed shorter messages. One asked, hesitantly, if they should still run big pushes through me or go straight to Brennan's new streamlining lead. The term meant nothing, and everything. I was being edged out from within. The final straw came the week before he fired me. One of my oldest colleagues, Hank, submitted his resignation after 13 years. Said he didn't recognize the place anymore. No exit lunch, no mention in the company Slack. I was the only one who walked him to the elevator. That elevator ride felt like foreshadowing, like something in me was descending too. I watched Brennan from a distance after that. He didn't micromanage. That would have required knowing what we actually did. No, he managed perception, and he was good at it. Good enough to fool the board. Good enough to make himself look like the hero. Even while the system cracked beneath him. But deep down, I knew something he didn't. Brennan Arlo might have clawed his way into the corner office, but he'd never earned a crown. And soon. He'd learn what happens when you push the architect out before the structure's finished. On Monday morning, the office greeted me like a stranger at a family reunion. No one was rude. No one said anything out of line. That's what made it worse. The change was in the silence. The long stretches of hallway without eye contact. The quick shuffles of chairs when I entered the break room. The way conversations dropped mid-sentence, like I'd triggered a mute button just by walking in. They weren't ignoring me. They were avoiding the risk of being seen beside me. The shift had been gradual. A few clipped replies in Slack. Forgot to CC you, here and there. Then came the meetings I used to lead that were suddenly rescheduled without me. It wasn't outright exile. It was the more efficient kind. Professional distancing. The kind that didn't require confrontation. I tried not to take it personally. For a while. But when Ethan stopped responding to my code review notes, something cracked a little. Ethan was one of my first mentees. The kind of brilliant but unpolished mind you root for even when they're 2 hours late to deployment day. I had walked him through his first system panic. Taught him how to debug recursion loops without swearing. Helped him find his voice in sprint planning. Now he was copying Brennan on every bug ticket even tangentially related to Mirage 9. And tagging me as the bottleneck. He didn't explain, didn't even look at me in the hall. It wasn't betrayal, not exactly. It was survival, and I understood it. That hurt more than if he'd actually stabbed me in the back. Still, I worked, quietly, precisely. No one asked me to. But I combed through the new UI integration and fixed 3 memory leaks the new efficiency team missed. I rewrote a malformed handler that could have corrupted real-time inputs. I didn't leave comments. I didn't sign my name. I did it because I couldn't bear to let the system fail. Not yet. One evening, as I sat at my desk 2 hours after the lights dimmed, I opened the Mirage 9 deployment branch. My cursor blinked on the final line, still empty, a single keystroke, and the launch pipeline would be technically viable. But my hands didn't move. I wasn't ready to let go, but I also wasn't sure anyone deserved me to hold on. When I closed the terminal, I caught sight of my reflection in the blackened monitor. Tired, but not broken. I stood to leave and nearly collided with a junior engineer. Joel, I think. He looked startled, then awkwardly stooped to pick up a paper from the floor. As he straightened, he glanced around once, then leaned a little closer. "We know you're right," he whispered, "but no one dares to say it anymore." And just like that, I was frozen. I didn't reply. I couldn't. He walked off without looking back, and I stood there, feeling a strange pressure behind my ribs, like grief and pride had collided, but couldn't decide which would surface first. They weren't loyal to Brennan. They were afraid. And fear had rewritten the social code faster than any update I'd ever pushed. That night, I sat alone in the stairwell for 20 minutes before going home. Not because I needed air, but because I needed space from the weight of watching a team I helped build erase its own backbone in silence. I never blamed them. I never would. But I had stopped expecting them to stand beside me. And that meant something in me. Something steady and quiet, and once unshakable, had started to pull back too. There's something eerie about watching a system blink, waiting for a command only you can give. That's what Mirage 9 had become. A perfectly tuned, half-breathing machine suspended in pause. Its final gate open, but untriggered. And I was the only one who knew it. The line of code was never written. Not because I forgot, because I chose not to, after weeks of being sidelined, watching my former team bow to the pressure of silence. I had stopped clinging to some fantasy of loyalty. What remained wasn't vengeance, it was precision. A line I refused to let them cross unless they proved they understood its weight. So I started writing something else instead. The Gatekeeper Protocol. Technically, it wasn't new. I'd first drafted it 3 years ago after a junior engineer accidentally deployed untested code directly into production during an overnight integration. The result? A multi-region outage and a month of apology calls. That was when I designed the idea, a final barrier built into the deployment pipeline that could only be unlocked by a digital key tied to the original architect's credentials. I brought it up again in March. During a compliance meeting, Brennan half attended via Zoom. He was eating a salad and scrolling on his phone while I presented a slide titled Final Authorization Layer, Optional Security Redundancy. He didn't ask questions. He didn't object. When the meeting ended, he squinted into the camera, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and said, Yeah, approved. Just make sure it doesn't slow anything down." I clipped that moment, saved the timestamp. I had his digital signature by 12:42 p.m. that day. He never read it, never followed up, and I never reminded him. I didn't tell anyone I was implementing it, not even the few engineers who still looked me in the eye. I embedded the protocol into the deployment branch slowly, piece by piece, under generic commit messages. I masked it with test coverage and routine updates. It looked like standard cleanup, until it wasn't. The system would function. It would pass every test. But when it reached the final phase, release, it would pause, awaiting a token, a single line, the final line. And unless that line was entered by me, Mirage 9 would go nowhere. I never stored the line in the system. I never wrote it down. The only copy lived in my head and in muscle memory. My fingers had typed it in full exactly once, on a personal, air-gapped machine. When it worked, the pipeline opened like clockwork. I wiped the draft, encrypted the keys, and renamed the folder grocerynotes.txt before burying it in an unindexed drive. Even I couldn't access it without following a multi-step authentication trail, just in case I ever stopped trusting myself. 2. This wasn't about sabotage. I wasn't blowing anything up. I was preserving what I built, protecting it from being used without comprehension. Or worse, without care. I remembered the way Brennan called Mirage a beautiful relic, the way he kept demanding speed, flash, release, never depth, never understanding. He wanted results he didn't respect. He thought code could be rushed like a press release. That trust could be replaced with control. But this system knew me. It didn't respond to titles or quarterly pressure. It responded to the logic that created it, and that logic still answered only to me. The irony was, Brennan had authorized it himself, signed it into existence between bites of kale and cherry tomato. The man who wanted to erase me had blindly handed me the last door he could never open. I suppose that's the thing about people who underestimate you. They don't see your hands shaping the exit until they're already on the outside. As I stared at the terminal that night, watching the cursor blink on the untouched line, I felt no anger, just calm, clean, clinical calm. They could delete my name from the team chart. They could root around me in meetings, but they couldn't deploy Mirage without crossing a bridge I never finished. And unless they remembered who built that bridge, they never would. Before shutting my screen, I added one more comment into the silent codebase. Not a warning, not a threat. Just 4 quiet words in a hidden annotation, deep within the core module, awaiting original architect confirmation. It started with a name I didn't recognize in the commit logs, A. Sterling. No introduction. No email. No handoff. Just a string of pushed code, right into the Mirage 9 core branch. I stared at the screen for a full minute, rereading the logs. Whoever this person was, they'd bypassed the review process entirely. No validation tests, no approval tags, just edits. In the most sensitive section of the architecture, the same section I'd spent years stabilizing. When I checked the deployment channel, there it was, a sleek little internal memo titled Mirage Optimization Plan, version 2.0. At the top of the doc, lead engineer, Adam Sterling. I wasn't listed. By 3 p.m., a team-wide meeting was dropped on everyone's calendar. I wasn't invited, but I joined anyway. I walked in mid-sentence. Sterling was already presenting. You could tell he was polished, smiling, confident, fluent in buzzwords. "We're taking a leaner, more scalable approach," he explained, gesturing to a flowchart that looked like it was pulled from a marketing deck. Not a dev environment. I stood silently in the back as he described his plan to elevate Mirage beyond its legacy constraints. He never once mentioned who built those constraints, or why they existed. By 5:30 p.m., the first build failed. Not a soft crash, an unrecoverable freeze during input processing. Core modules looped into themselves, logs flooded with null pointers. Within minutes, half the team was scrambling to diagnose the problem, and the rest were blaming the system itself. Sterling shrugged. Could be a compatibility issue with the old logic. Anne Brennan, with no pause and no shame, turned to me. You'll need to fix this, tonight. No acknowledgement that I hadn't been included. No mention that I hadn't touched this new version. Just a flat directive. Like I was tech support for a mess I never made. At 6:51 p.m., an email arrived in my inbox. Need full diagnostics before 9 a.m. No need to log hours. No pay, no credit, no voice. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened Sterling's commit history, then his profile, then his past companies. What I found made my chest tighten, twice before. Sterling had been flagged for code plagiarism, once from a now-defunct gaming startup, settled quietly. Another from a wearable tech company that had to pull a $40 million launch due to embedded proprietary code. Both cases had been buried, scrubbed off major tech forms, but I found fragments, screenshots, archive.org, snapshots, and one headline buried deep in an old industry newsletter. CTO exit amid IP concerns. Adam Sterling resigns without statement. But that wasn't the part that made me sit back in my chair. The part that did? A tiny footnote in a 6-year-old investor brief. Private seed sponsor. B. Arlo Ventures. Brennan had backed Sterling's previous company. Quietly. If Sterling's reputation burned, Brennan's did too. That's why he brought him in. That's why he protected him. And that's why I was expendable. I didn't scream. Didn't confront. You stopped fixing. I copied everything, logged the error trails, isolated the breaking points. But I didn't patch them. Not this time. Because for the first time in my career, I realized something chilling. The system wasn't broken. The people in charge of it were. That night, I opened my Gatekeeper protocol draft. My hand hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking where the final line should be. I didn't write it, but I didn't look away from it. Either. The email came at 5:42 p.m., marked high priority. Subject line, escalation, client concern. I opened it with the kind of slow dread that's born not from surprise, but from certainty. I already knew what was inside. Log errors, client complaints, vague panic about the demo build, and at the bottom, a single sentence from Brennan, cold and clipped like always. Resolve by morning, No excuses. Lupin Brielle. No greeting, no context, no accountability. By 6:20 p.m., I was called upstairs. I didn't knock. Brennan's door was already open, like a trap waiting to spring. He didn't look up from his laptop as I stepped in. "Close the door," he said. I didn't. "You've seen the logs. You know the client's pissed. Sterling's code should have been reviewed, and you let it through." I didn't reply. Because I hadn't let it through. I hadn't been invited to review it. But that didn't matter now, did it? You're still the listed architect, which means you're accountable. So here's the deal. Fix it tonight, or you're done here. He said it like he was offering me a drink, not an ultimatum. I waited for something else. Clarification. A nod to the truth. Maybe even a flicker of remorse. But there was nothing. Only the blank confidence of someone who had decided the easiest way to win was to rewrite the record. The silence stretched between us, dense and hot. And then, inside me, something shifted, not broke, shifted. I'd spent 6 years pouring everything into a system this company didn't deserve. I stayed up through server failures, smoothed out bugs between airport gates, canceled holidays to make sure our roadmap didn't slip. And for what? So I could be the fallback girl? The last one holding the bag when the Golden Boys failed? No. I stood, smoothed my blazer. Then I'm done here. Just like that. No apology, no justification, no anger, only truth. I walked out without another word. Behind me, the digital wall clock flipped, 6:55 p.m. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I was leaving behind, because I was the one who built it. But I didn't head straight for the elevator. I made a quiet left down the hall, toward the old break room on the 3rd floor. It smelled faintly of burned coffee and cardboard now, abandoned since Brennan cut the late-night food program. Still, the room had one last use for me. I knelt beside the dusty cabinet in the corner and reached behind the stack of unopened cups. There, taped to the underside of the lowest shelf, was a flat silver anti-static pouch, unmarked, untouched, forgotten. But not by me. Inside, my personal drive. Not a clone of Mirage 9, not stolen IP, the original architecture. Clean logic, pre-Sterling, pre-bureaucracy, pre-compromise. The structure I'd mapped when Mirage was still just a concept, the one that actually worked. I slipped it into my bag like a bookmark. Nothing dramatic, no alarms, no breach. Just reclamation, downstairs. The lobby hummed with quiet conversation. No one looked up as I passed. The security guard offered a distracted nod. It was like I was already invisible, but they'd notice soon, because the final line still hadn't been written. And no one else knew how. Outside in the parking garage, I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The air inside was still warm from the afternoon sun. I powered on my laptop and waited for the terminal to load. There it was. The line of code I'd stared at 100 times. Still blank, still waiting. Line. Ready to confirm launch authority. I let my fingers rest on the keyboard. The same hands that had steadied this system through every failed beta. Every late-night pivot. Every misguided innovation. I thought of the engineers I'd trained, the clients I'd protected, the silence I'd swallowed. And then I thought of Brennan, of how he spoke over me, of how he erased me, of how he signed a protocol he never read. I didn't type the line, but I didn't close the file either, because I knew something they didn't. The system wasn't ready, and I was no longer theirs to fix it. I didn't drive home. I turned left out of the garage instead of right, letting the roads decide where I ended up. It was past 7:00 p.m., but the city still hummed with after-hours motion, cars blinking through intersections, office towers cooling under amber streetlight. I passed a gas station I didn't need and a diner I used to stop at when Mirage was just a prototype held together by duct tape and hope. 5 blocks later, I pulled into a mostly empty parking lot, an old public space across from a storage unit building. Silent, private, no eyes, no witnesses. I killed the engine, but left the lights on. The silence in the car settled around me like a second skin. In the passenger seat sat my laptop, still warm from earlier. I opened it without thinking, without hesitation. My hands moved on their own. The terminal glowed. The build path loaded. The last line still waited. A blinking cursor. A heartbeat of possibility and absence. I rested my fingers on the keys. The code was stable, flawless. Really, it had been tested 1,000 ways. All it needed was one more line. A confirmation of launch authority. One sentence. One breath. I didn't type it. Not yet. My mind drifted back to a night a month ago, when I had typed that line for the first and only time. It was late. Brennan had just finished a department-wide meeting with his usual flair, tossing out phrases like efficiency over ego and replaceable roles in scalable structures. I remembered the exact sentence that flipped something in me. Engineers are interchangeable. Systems are what we invest in. I had gone home, poured a glass of wine I never drank, and opened the file, not out of spite, out of sorrow. The line had felt sacred at first, something final, like carving your name into the hull of a ship before it sails. But once I saw it on screen, something in me recoiled. It didn't feel right to finish something for someone who never valued how it began. So I deleted it, not out of rage, but out of principle, tonight. My reasons were different. Now I wasn't protecting my pride. I was protecting my creation. Brennan would try to force the system out the door, use Sterling's compromised patches, cut corners until the structure collapsed, then blame the foundation for not holding. I had seen it play out before, with other systems, other engineers. But Mirage 9 was mine. It was never about revenge. It was about control. And tonight, control meant refusing to give in, not with a bang, but with nothing. No line, no push, no permission. Still, my fingers hovered, my heart, not racing, steady. There was guilt, yes, somewhere beneath the layers of clarity. I thought of Maya, the junior engineer who stayed late for every test, of Joel, who whispered, "We know you're right," when no one else dared to speak. They didn't deserve this silence, but neither did Mirage deserve to be deployed by hands that only knew how to extract from it. The system wasn't failing. The leadership was, and I wasn't going to let them succeed by cannibalizing what I'd built from integrity. I reached down and opened the encryption log, wrote a single internal note. Final line withheld by original architect. System remains incomplete by design. I closed the terminal. Didn't shut the laptop, just let the screen dim into black. Outside, a text buzzed across my phone screen. Production build failed. Can you confirm access? From an unknown number, but I already knew whose panic it carried. I didn't respond. I didn't even smile. I just sat in that parked car. Engine silent, code untouched, cursor still waiting. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't vengeance. It was subtraction, one missing line. And nothing moves. The dashboard lit up in soft blue, waiting for my command. I sat still in the driver's seat, engine off, fingers hovering just above the keys of my laptop. The air around me was heavy with silence. No music, no movement, just the low hum of my machine and the slow rhythm of my breath. The message had come through minutes ago. Production build failed. Can you confirm access? No greeting, no apology, just need. It was 7:08 p.m. I stared at the blinking cursor. In the world of systems architecture, there are two kinds of power, the power to create and the power to halt. I had spent 6 years perfecting Mirage 9, line by line, function by function. But the most important line, the one they didn't know existed, was the one I wrote to stop it. I opened the failsafe file, hidden in plain sight, named something forgettable. Inside it, one line sat dormant. A gatekeeper, a conditional lock. I entered my credentials, 2 layers of verification, then typed the final command. Not a deployment line. A lock. 7:09 p.m. I pressed enter. Across the city, in Tarkin's main operations room. The war room buzzed. Engineers leaned over keyboards. Sterling barked orders. Brennan paced behind him, jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the countdown clock above the deployment screen. The system had passed all tests, logs were green. The client was on standby for confirmation. 3, 2, 1, and then, gray. The dashboard flickered, then turned slate gray. Status, frozen. Build, unresponsive. Keyboard inputs failed. Push attempts were rejected. Someone tried to rerun the pipeline. And then it appeared. Error 74. Awaiting authorization token. Origin architect only. Sterling paled. I don't know what this is, he stammered. I've never seen that string. A younger engineer pulled up the logs. This isn't part of our new framework. It's baked into the original architecture. Root level. Brennan stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Override it. We can't. There's no override. It's locked from origin. A pause. Then his voice, sharper now. Get her on the phone. But no one had my number. Slack? Disabled. Email? Deactivated. Internal tools? Revoked. She was gone, and they'd made sure of that. Back in my car. I watched the terminal reflect the result. Lock confirmed. All deployments disabled. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. There was no need. Because this wasn't revenge. It was design. A system built by someone who understood that not all threats come from outside. That sometimes, what needs protecting isn't just the data, but the integrity beneath it. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed late without being asked. Of all the people who had stood beside me when this system was still just an idea on a whiteboard. Most of them were gone now, replaced, restructured, silenced. But I was still here. And so was the architecture they couldn't rewrite. The power wasn't in destruction, it was in refusal. A quiet, calculated no. They wanted a launch. I gave them a pause. They wanted obedience. I gave them absence. I closed the terminal. The screen dimmed to black. My reflection stared back from the glossy surface, faint and calm. I didn't feel victorious, just steady. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it ring. And as the sound faded into the night, I opened my leather notebook and wrote one line beneath the others. 7:09 p.m. They lost access. I reclaimed authorship. The lights on the launch floor flickered twice, then dimmed to a steady. It was 7:30 when the silence hit harder than any explosion could have. At first, the team thought it was a minor network delay. But when every screen froze, every progress bar stopped halfway, and the countdown timer disappeared entirely from the central dashboard. A collective stillness swept the room. Brennan didn't blink at first. He stood at the center of the glass-encased control room, arms folded, pretending this was still within the boundaries of normal. But one glance at the lead systems engineer, whose face had drained white, told him otherwise. What's going on? Brennan asked. Voice clipped. No one answered. A soft chime rang out from the console in the back. A red error banner slid across the main dashboard. Awaiting authorization token. Origin architect only. Who the hell is the origin architect? Brennan barked. Silence again. Then someone, far too new to know better, answered in a hush. Brielle Vexley. Brennan's face twisted, like hearing a ghost had coded the locks around his empire. Back in her car, parked 2 miles away with rain gently coating the windshield. I watched the live stream updates freeze on my phone, one by one. I didn't smirk. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled slowly. The way you do after surviving something no one else saw was killing you. The version they'd been preparing for deployment was technically sound, but structurally hollow. They thought they had the skeleton. What they didn't know was that the heart was missing. And without the origin key, the system wouldn't beat, wouldn't breathe, wouldn't even twitch. I had built the kill safe for ethical reasons, But tonight, it had a poetic function. Back inside Orion's control suite, Brennan spun on his heel and pointed. You. Roll back the build. Revert to the previous version. Sir, the rollback command requires dual authentication from the creator. We don't have her credential. Then bypass it. It's not possible, said Kira, a senior engineer who once trained under me. Her voice was flat but steady. The protocol's embedded at architecture level, root-locked. You're telling me she locked down a $950 million system? Alone? Kira nodded. And you signed off on the testing approval in March. We warned you not to skip validations. The silence that followed wasn't the reverent kind. It was the kind that slowly bruises a leader's credibility in front of their team. By 8:15 p.m., news of the delay started trickling outside the company walls. A reporter from Market Edge pinged Brennan's assistant asking for comment about the unexpected hold on Orion's long-awaited launch. Meanwhile, investors were already tightening their fists. A major hedge fund sent a chilling message to the boardroom Slack. Funds suspended until launch is secured. We do not invest in unsecured systems. Brennan, who once bragged about charm being better than code, found neither could save him now. He stormed into the side conference room and slammed the glass door shut. Through the transparent panel, the engineers could still see him pacing like a caged executive. I want every line of her code dissected by morning, he shouted at someone on speakerphone. I don't care what it costs. But it wouldn't matter, because the protection protocol wasn't a bug. It was a design feature. I never hid it. I documented it thoroughly in internal updates. But Brennan never read them. He was always too busy chasing spotlight interviews and strategic handshakes. At 9:27 p.m., a young assistant named Malik walked up to the board liaison with a tablet in hand. His tone was cautious, but his words clear. I've reviewed the protocol logs. There is no way to override the current state without the origin architect's token. Meaning, Brielle is the only one who can authorize release. The liaison blinked slowly, her jaw tightening. Then that system is effectively frozen. Yes, ma'am. Then why didn't we have a backup? Malik hesitated. We did, but Brennan ordered it decommissioned, said it slowed momentum. In my parked car, I watched the board meeting notification light up my inbox, unread. I had no need to attend. Not tonight. This wasn't vengeance, not entirely. This was design, ethical design. They thought they could rip out the soul of the system and still sell its body. They were wrong. They didn't fire Brennan in a meeting. There was no press release, no grand announcement, just a silent redirection of authority. His access revoked by 7:45 a.m. His name quietly removed from the Myridge Core documentation by 8:13. By mid-morning, his office door stood ajar, monitor dark, and a sticky note left behind on the window. Closed for alignment review. I watched it unfold from afar. My phone buzzed 3 times in the space of an hour. Not from Brennan, not from HR. From people whose voices I hadn't heard in years, board assistants, former engineers, even one of the senior architects who once dismissed me in a meeting for being too careful. Their messages all shared the same tone, urgency wrapped in politeness. They didn't ask if I was okay. They asked if I was available. I wasn't in a rush to reply. After everything, I needed space, not for revenge, but to exhale. To remember who I was before the long nights, before Mirage became a battlefield of ethics and ego. I took a long walk through Larchmere, where the leaves were already beginning to turn. The wind had a kindness to it, a hush that felt earned. And yet, beneath that calm, a question stirred. What now? That answer arrived in an email titled, Legacy Continues. It was from Corinne and Elias, the 2 interns I once mentored back when Mirage was just a code name on a whiteboard. I remembered their curious eyes, their cautious fingers on the keyboard. They had questions about everything: encryption standards, edge deployment, whether coffee tasted better from the second floor machine or the one downstairs. Now, years later, they were the co-founders of a rising AI safety firm called Elleries. We saw what happened, the email read, and we remembered who taught us not just to build systems, but to respect them. I stared at the screen for a long time. They weren't offering pity, they were offering purpose. Their proposition was clear: join Alaris as head of engineering. Rebuild Mirage. Not the version tainted by PR and performance bonuses, but the system I once dreamed of. A system rooted in ethical boundaries, user dignity, and protective architecture that didn't rely on one person holding a kill switch. They didn't want vengeance. They wanted resilience. I flew out the next morning, quietly. No press. No LinkedIn update. Just me and the future I once thought I'd lost. Alaris's headquarters wasn't in a glass skyscraper. It was in a brick building near Lake Union. Sunlight filtered through large windows. People coding in socked feet and oversized hoodies. It smelled like lavender and whiteboard markers. Corinne greeted me first. She didn't shake my hand. She hugged me. "I kept your post-it from 2018, she whispered. The one that said, "Systems fail when people stop caring." It got me through a few tough nights. We walked through the open workspace where Elias joined us, and together they showed me their prototype. HoloRoot, an adaptive AI framework designed to carry forward my old integrity models from Mirage, but with full transparency and community auditing baked in. My throat tightened. Somehow, they'd taken the architecture I had once buried beneath corporate deadlines and brought it to life with more clarity than I ever managed at Orion. And now they wanted me to guide it. I sat in their small glass-walled conference room and opened my laptop. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hunted. I didn't feel like I was tiptoeing past power games or decoding sabotage. I felt useful. I felt free. The first line I wrote wasn't code, it was a comment. Begin again. But with conscience. I glanced up at Corin and Elias. "Let's build a version that can't be abused," I said softly. "Let's give the power back to the people who actually use it." They nodded. And so, in a quiet room with no applause, no revenge speech, no headlines, I began again. Not as a martyr of a broken system, but as the architect of something better. Sometimes, justice doesn't need an audience. Sometimes, it just needs the right door to open and the right people waiting on the other side. The new office didn't smell like power. It smelled like eucalyptus oil and black coffee. No glass partitions, no nameplates etched in gold. Just open air, natural light, and whiteboards still half covered in red marker loops from the night before. I sat at a desk not labeled Chief Architect, but Team 3, and for the first time in months. I didn't mind. Titles weren't currency here. Contribution was. I tapped the keyboard slowly. Mirage. No, not the old Mirage. This was something else. Same name. New soul. The old code had been an armory. Locked. Layered. Untrusting. This time, I was building a home. A system that wouldn't just function, but adapt. One that didn't punish its users for not knowing the rules. One that didn't depend on fear. Behind me, someone approached quietly. I didn't turn. I recognized the rhythm of her steps. Corinne, the junior dev who used to triple-check every line of mine before daring to push her own. Now, she was a co-founder here. And I, somehow, was the guest in her vision. There was poetry in that, in a cycle rewriting itself. She leaned against the desk. "Are you going to write the final line this time?" Her voice was gentle. She wasn't just asking about code. I stopped typing. Let my fingers hover. In the weeks since leaving Orion, that question had hovered over me like fog. At 7:09 p.m. that night, I hadn't added a weapon. I'd restored balance. But what haunted me wasn't what I had done, it was what I hadn't. I looked up from the monitor and out through the window, beyond the parking lot. The city's skyline shimmered in late sunlight. How many systems had we built out of survival? How many layers of protection did we weave? Not to advance humanity, but to brace against it. I didn't write it, I said softly, because they never earned it. Corin nodded, not a flicker of judgment in her eyes, just the quiet understanding of someone who'd lived it too. She sat beside me as I reopened the module. The space was still there, a blank line at the end of the execution sequence, the same place I had paused months ago. This time, it didn't feel like a cliff, it felt like a choice. I began typing, not a kill switch, not an encryption lock, but a collaborative key structure. It wouldn't block deployment if someone else tried to override it. Instead, it would notify everyone involved. Transparency, accountability, grace, trust. Written in code. You could have destroyed everything, Corin said after a moment. I almost did. Why didn't you? Because destruction is easy, I said. Designing something better? That's the hard part. I paused, then smiled. Not the brittle, polite kind I'd worn for years, a real one. I want to build something where no one ever has to write a line like that again. We pushed the commit together. On the screen, the message popped up. Commit successful. Branch. People first. A moment of silence passed between us. Then the others gathered. No applause, just nods. Presence. A circle around the boardroom glass wall, where someone had scrawled a single phrase in bold ink. Ethics is the root function. Everything else is a derivative. That night, we didn't celebrate like victors. We planned like architects. Systems can change. So can leadership. So can legacy. All it takes is one unwritten line, and the courage to rewrite everything that came before it. Some systems are built to protect power. Others are built to protect people. If this story made you think differently about justice, loyalty, or leadership, let us know in the comments. Share this with someone who's ever felt replaced, overlooked, or silenced, because their story isn't over either. And if you believe more people deserve to hear stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Let's rebuild the system, one story at a time.